The Supreme Court now has just 9 days to issue a decision before that law takes effect on January 19th. And at least listening to those oral arguments seemed inclined perhaps to allow the law to stand. Joining me now to discuss, Tim Bernard. He's a tech policy analyst and writer, and Glenn Gerstell. He's a former general counsel at the NSA, now at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. First, Tim, if I could begin with you, listening to those arguments, and I know there's an element of tea leaf reading here because the questions don't necessarily imply the final decision, but who do you think ended those arguments with the upper hand?
As you say, there's a lot of prediction there. Mm-hmm. There were certainly some very tough questions for TikTok. But also some for the government, and I did detect some sympathy with the TikTok creators who are the other petitioner. But I think we just have to remember this is a very big deal for free expression in the US. There's millions and millions, around 170 million TikTok users who are going to be impacted, and they have a right to speak, to hear whatever they want, including Chinese propaganda if they want. And this could be one of the most influential free speech decisions in the history of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we're showing some of those TikTok videos here. And I think most people, when they hear TikTok, they think this: oh, how to do your hair, how to cook a dish, or how to do a dance, right? But the U.S. intelligence community, as you well know, Glenn, has found that, as Tim was saying, China uses this to influence American minds, influence U.S. elections, including the most recent one. It pits national security against First Amendment rights. Which of those two principles wins out? And could you sense the court leaning either way on emphasizing one or the other?
So this is indeed a tough question because it pits two really important issues. One is protecting our national security, and two is the freedom of speech as embodied in the First Amendment. There have been a long series of court cases that touch this, but none that directly deals with these two interests in the context of a social media platform. So this is completely unprecedented. I mean, to be fair to TikTok, they've made the point that the government hasn't said that the Chinese government is directly influencing TikTok, but it has the potential to do so. And it's that potential that is of concern to national security officials. By the same time, we haven't ever had a situation where the government is in effect, not directly, but in effect taking away a social media platform used by 170 million people. So this is a big issue. Just very quickly, I think if we step back for a second, this leads to two really important points. One is that we're going to be wrestling with this question of the risks and rewards of Chinese technology for years. This is just one aspect of it. And the second, very quickly, is that we really don't have a good sense of how we want to regulate social media. This is an example of how the First Amendment is intersecting with this case, and we're all over it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Listen, you mentioned other technology. Remember the focus on Huawei, right? Who builds the sort of the guts of the internet and concerns about Chinese ability to backdoor through there. That's already been an issue. So Tim, to that point, I mean, the fact is there's a lot of disinformation that is spread on U.S.-owned platforms. X, for one, Facebook for another. Facebook just announced, we're not going to do fact-checking anymore. Does that raise a broader question here that it is not just TikTok that is a conduit for disinformation to American users?
I do agree with you there. One of the big questions that really they didn't discuss at all is how would China actually use some manipulation of the algorithm to influence people? And we don't really know how any of that works. If China had absolute access to the platform, would they actually be able to successfully do it? They, as you said, the platforms here are not trying to spread misinformation, but it happens. Right? They're just trying to maximize what users look at. If they were trying to spread misinformation, would they actually succeed? Would they just turn off the users? We really don't know. And the government, the courts have this traditional deference to Congress and the administration on anything they call a national security risk.
I mean,
but it's pretty debatable, and I think it'd be very interesting if any of the Supreme Court opinions, maybe not the majority, but who knows, probe the limits of that deference. Especially with the incoming Trump administration. If we think back to the last Trump term, at the very beginning, we had the travel ban, which is also abusively on national security grounds.
Right.
The Supreme Court is starting to think about how do we evaluate if national security justification is being used appropriately.
Yeah.
I think that would be very interesting.
Well, listen, on the travel ban, they ultimately sided with Trump on that, right, and gave the executive branch wide authority to make such judgments. Let me ask you this, Glenn, because to China's motives here, what does it say that TikTok, owned by this Chinese parent company ByteDance, has said it would rather be shut down than sold? Does that give you any concern? Does it reveal something about China's interest in the platform? Why would a company say that? We'd rather, if we're not owned by China, we're done.
The reality, as TikTok has said from their point of view, is that they need the algorithm and the engineering expertise supplied by its parent company, ByteDance, which I might add is partly owned by U.S. investors as well. And TikTok has said, look, the reality, the simple commercial reality is that we cannot operate if we are not owned and allowed to use the algorithm that is subject to Chinese export controls. TikTok would be meaningless without it. We couldn't supply the content. Other countries couldn't access U.S. content, and it's simply not going to work. That's probably the commercial reality. I might also add, Jim, just quickly that we don't know for sure that the court is going to make a decision right now. They have 9 days in which to do so before the statute comes into effect. This is a really complicated, difficult issue, as we saw by the fact that both sides got tough questions from the 9 justices. So it's entirely possible that the court might, and I just emphasize might, issue some kind of stay or injunction and say, let's just wait a while until we come up with an opinion, or perhaps kick the case back down to the district court. The significance of which is that would give President Trump and the new Congress a chance to take another look at this if they wanted to.
Fair point. A lot of potential different outcomes here. Tim Bernard, Glenn Gerstell, thanks so much to both of you.